The BYU football program is 0-2 after a 9-0 start, and understandably, everybody in and around Provo is upset with that fact. What needs to change for BYU to get back into the win column and keep their Big 12 title hopes alive? Well, I can tell you one thing. It isn't to fire Aaron Roderick.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view or listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast, which is your original daily BYU podcast. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. New customers can go online to FanDuel and place a $5 bet. That $5 bet hits, you get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Get started today at FanDuel.com. All right, coming up on today's show, we do our film review Monday, looking back at what the lessons were to be learned from the Arizona State game ahead of BYU getting ready for their game against Arizona this week. We'll also talk about a certain halftime speech given by Tyler Batty and also talk about what needs to happen for BYU to make the Big 12 title game and ultimately what the odds are that they can make it to Arlington. So let's get started today. And you heard me say in the open, I don't believe that firing Aaron Roderick is going to get BYU any closer to a Big 12 title, and I absolutely believe that to be 100% true. I have seen it all weekend long across social media, different podcasts, written stuff, whatever medium you happen to consume BYU news in. I have had people say, fire A-Rod, fire Aaron Roderick. Okay, I understand that in this day and age of hot take central on social media, we're so quick with our knee-jerk reactions to say, fire this person, bench that person, change this, change that, do this, do that. What needs to happen and what needs to change in our discourse is if you're going to say a change needs to be made, you better give a dang good reason as to what will change materially, why that change needs to happen and why it needs to happen now. BYU is 11 games deep into their season, everybody. And if you were to fire Aaron Roderick today, you better give me a dang good reason why there is another person on BYU staff who's going to be able to step in on short notice and A, make the quote wholesale changes that you think need to happen, and B, how that is going to improve BYU's odds of beating Houston and, more importantly, of potentially getting to a Big 12 title game, winning said game, and, fingers crossed, making the college football playoff. If you could give me a concrete plan and write it out and send it in to me and explain why you believe firing Aaron Roderick today, Monday, will do this and then the different steps it'll take to improving the BYU football program, I'll hear you out. I will not hear out fire A-Rod, fire Aaron Roderick, and do it today. There are certain people on my very podcast network, compatriots of mine, who have made that point for week after week after week, and they are doing what I have been told is rage baiting you as Cougar fans. If Kalani Sitake is going to make a change at offensive coordinator, it will not happen this week, and I will eat my shorts if it does happen. That is not Kalani's style, nor is it, I think, a prudent decision in the moment. If you want to see what an in-season offensive coordinator change can do for a program, all you got to do is look at the University of Utah and what has happened. Andy Ludwig just 2 seasons ago was the toast of the town. This was a guy that Notre Dame wanted to pay multiple millions of dollars to come to Notre Dame with Marcus Freeman and be their offensive coordinator. Less than 2 years later, he decided to up and quit in the middle of a season. Was it of his own volition? Was it a decision that he made with Kyle Whittingham and other people at Utah? Or was he told, hey, you're resigning, we're going to fire you? I don't know all that went into it. But what I can tell you is watching what happened with Utah's offense before Andy Ludwig left and what has happened afterwards, has there been any material improvement to Utah's offense? Nope, there has not. In fact, I would say that Utah's offense is even worse than it was before Andy Ludwig stepped down. That's just one example of making an in-season change. If Kalani Sitake ultimately decides to make a change at offensive coordinator, that's well within his right to do so. He is the head coach at Brigham Young University, and he has every right to do whatever he feels is best with his football program. But let's also understand that Aaron Roderick has led BYU to some pretty high places in his time as BYU's offensive coordinator. Some of y'all forget he's developed 2 NFL quarterbacks, and you can argue that, well, Jared Hall's on a practice squad and Zach Wilson's a backup. They're still in the NFL. And think of the highs they led BYU to in as they were the BYU starting quarterback for multiple seasons in a row. there is a lot that I disagree with regards to what Aaron Roderick and how he operates this program. Personnel decisions, tempo is something I've been harping on. I also believe that some of the play calling at times is a little bit it's in question. But I believe that Aaron Roderick, looking back at this Arizona State game in particular, I thought he made some material adjustments to his play calling scheme, the overall scheme of the offense, and one thing that, once again, I've been advocating for, tempo. Now, it's not 2-minute hectic all-out offense. I get that. Some of you are saying they need to go to a 2-minute offense all game long. I am not an advocate for going absolutely all out in 2-minute offense for an entire game, because I think, A, that's going to wear out your players because they just haven't practiced to that level for multiple months in a row. And B, as he mentioned last week, and I agree with him, it pares down your playbook to a minimal amount of plays, and those can be easily scouted at that point. But what I saw against Arizona State, to back up kind of what I'm saying here, but fire A-Rod. Okay, you got to give me a good reason why you would do that and what's going to change. But what I saw against Arizona State, to back up my side of things, and like I said, I'm taking a very unpopular position, and I fully understand that. But one thing I saw against Arizona State that I have been pleading for is that BYU went to more of what I like to call their tempo package that they've showcased with Jaren Hall in particular under center. Remember back in 2021, 2022, when Jaren Hall was BYU starting quarterback, every time BYU seemingly hit a big play, we're talking a medium to long-range chunk play, BYU raced down the field, got lined up and ran another play immediately to try and catch the defense napping. There was no substitution. They got on the ball and got after it for another play. Then, if they had a play that had a negative result, whether it was no gain, a tackle for loss, etc., they'd regroup, get the guys in the huddle, take a minute, take a breath, and then get back after it. That's what I saw all game long against Arizona State. And it's something that, for whatever reason, BYU has not been doing a lot of this year. In fact, I would say this is the first game I have seen it for long stretches of the game. Yes, I understand why you want to see BYU go tempo, because it seems like Jake Retzlaff gets in more of a zone when things are moving quicker. But I also understand why BYU wants to slow it down at points. But I think that the mix and the speed up, slow down nature of that tempo, it can mess with the defense. And you saw that on full display, particularly in that third quarter, as BYU mounted their comeback going into that fourth quarter as well against Arizona State. So once again, in this day and age, we all want to fire off hot takes, and I understand that fire A-Rod is a very in vogue thing to do for the BYU football program. But once again, you got to have a good reason why you would fire him and what it would change, I think, to make material changes that would, A, improve BYU's chances in the postseason. And if you can give me a good reason why, I'll hear you out. But I will not hear out, just once again, you firing back at me, fire A-Rod. It does nobody any good. And call me an apologist if you want to. I don't care. I do this podcast and I state my opinion, and I'll just sit on it. And that's where I sit right now. I don't understand why firing Aaron Roderick, benching Jake Retzlaff, changing this, changing that, how it's going to have a material improvement to BYU's chances coming up the rest of the season. And against Houston this Saturday, potentially in the Big 12 title game, and fingers crossed, a college football playoff berth if they're able to win those two games ahead of it. But at the same time, I can understand why all y'all are going to want to cancel Jake. I get all that. But once again, I just don't want to hear why. I don't want to hear fire A-Rod. I want to hear why firing or benching or doing whatever you believe needs to be done is going to improve BYU right now. Changes could come in the offseason. That's absolutely a case. I saw a certain report last night saying that Jay Hill might be a finalist at Utah State for that head coaching position. TBD, I don't know if that has legs to it, but you know what? Until changes come, I think making change for change's sake, it's not going to have the desired results. And in fact, once again, I think it would have a negative impact across the board for the BYU football program. All right. Now, BYU started slow against Arizona State. I'm not breaking any news to anybody, but a certain halftime speech got leaked online, and I don't know who recorded it, but I think it gives some insight as to what changed for BYU, particularly against Arizona State in the second half. And we'll delve into that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys to get you all of the sports betting needs you need covered. That's the best part about FanDuel is you can ready to tackle all of the NFL action with FanDuel as they are America's #1 sports. But right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything to place your live bets on the NFL and anything else all in one place. So you get the hunch in the middle of a game. You can check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing those bets with our friends over at FanDuel. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today. Once again, you get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com to get started today. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being with us. All right, so a security guard or somebody else in the bowels of Sun Devil Stadium, or I guess what is now Mountain America Stadium down there in Tempe, Arizona, recorded a pretty, let's say, vulgar speech, a halftime speech from Tyler Batty that got leaked online. Now, completely anonymous, because obviously you cannot see Tyler Batty making that speech. You can only hear him making it. And the person who's recording it turned on their camera, but never showed their face or any really other descriptive information to find out who it was. Now, some people have said that you could request the CCTV footage of that hallway and hopefully identify who the perpetrator was. But that's all beside the point to what I want to talk about with regards to Tyler Batty. There have been a lot of people after that came out online who have been really quick, similar to what we just talked about Aaron Roderick, about condemning BYU football. See, they're all holier than thou, but they're no better than anybody else. Okay, great. You know what? BYU, as a church-affiliated institution, is always going to take that hit whenever something like this leaks online. But anybody, and I mean anybody with the sound of my voice, if you have been on a sports team, you have had a teammate or two that has made a similar type speech, or you have made a similar type speech and have used such language. If that is going to turn you off to sports in general, wow. You may want to find a different thing to go and be interested in. I'm not going to advocate for using the F word multiple times and using it in some of the context that Tyler, I'm not going to say that's okay, but also understand reality. These are young men, and Tyler Batty was trying to do what he knew how to do best, and that is to fire up his teammates. That first half, was anybody pleased with how BYU played in that first half? I sure wasn't. I watched BYU sleepwalk through a first half of maybe the most important game in their program's history. Had they been able to win that game with Colorado losing, BYU would have punched their ticket to the Big 12 title game. We would have been talking about BYU playing in Arlington and playing for a college football playoff berth. But they sleptwalked through the first 30 minutes of that game, and it took a furious comeback attempt in the second half to try and get back into this game, and they very nearly pulled it off. There's a dear friend of this podcast who I am not going to name, but I do know had an incident because they were once upon a time a walk-on with the BYU football program. This goes back years. They have been long since disassociated from the program. They're just not part of the program. They aged out. But they were a walk-on with the program and got into a little bit of a scrap during practice one day out at the student-athlete building. And I'm not going to name this person, but the story has been told to me multiple times. And they got into a scrap with some of their teammates and got up and used some colorful language. Well, lo and behold, they turned around and there were standing 3 members, I believe, of the Quorum of the 70 of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and even more importantly, 2 members of the Quorum of the 12 of the church standing there on the sideline within earshot of the string of colorful language that this individual used. This person got up, turned around, and the way it's described to me, they turned white as a ghost from like, oh, bleep. My time at BYU is over. You know what happened in the aftermath of that incident? As this person tells it, one of the 70s kind of looked at him, gave him a head nod, and said, "We get it." That's all that was said. This kid said, and they just moved on. Any of you who believe that BYU is this holier than thou place, that a nary a swear word is ever said around that football program, have not spent enough time around the BYU football players, because guess what? There are things said in the heat of battle that all of us would regret probably, and that was a violation, by the way, of privacy. I will acknowledge that as well. That person recording that and then disseminating it online without without a proper authorization to do so. It's an invasion of privacy. But once again, Tyler Batty was trying to do what he wanted to get across to his teammates, and that is to motivate them to get back out on the field and play much better in the second half. Did they play better in that second half? Absolutely. Was that speech the reason why? I don't know, but I think BYU and some of the players in the program, I'm not saying all of them, I think they got a little too caught up by the enormity of the situation, and they were playing scared to start that game. Once again, this is a podcast that's not going to win me many listeners. I don't believe so. Maybe I'm hitting all the high notes. I don't know. We'll see what the reaction is once it comes out. But I believe BYU played scared to start that game and got rocked onto their heels. And we're not playing, to use a soccer expression, on the front foot. In the second half, BYU's mindset changed, and they did get on the front foot, and they started playing better. Defense started making bigger plays. Offense started hitting on big plays down the field, scoring touchdowns. That 96-yard drive for that fourth down stop against Arizona State, I really believe that's the moment when ASU kind of got rocked back onto their heels, and BYU finally got their punches in and started going forward. They started charging, and BYU very nearly pulled off what would have been an incredible comeback. Rewatching this game, BYU very nearly had this game in hand. And once again, if Jake Retzlaff would have hit that hole shot to JoJo Phillips, just a couple of steps, man, he hits that hole shot. We're talking about a completely different feeling about this BYU football program this week versus what the feeling is right now. Alas, what happens? He misses that open. I mean, it was an open touchdown. And by the way, it's a throw that Jake Retzlaff has made earlier this season. That hole shot against cover 2, it's a tough throw, but Jake has completed to Chase Roberts at least once, I know, for a touchdown. I saw it with my own eyes at Lavelle Edwards Stadium. It was to the other side of the end zone, but it's a hole shot that beats a cover 2 zone that Arizona State was in that circumstance, and you got to make that throw. Very next throw, Jake airmails a pass, it's intercepted, and all but seals BYU's fate in that circumstance. It's a really, really tough thing to stomach, speaking of BYU, but I can understand what Tyler Batty was trying to do. He's trying to be a leader. He's trying to express his heartfelt emotions about the moment to the BYU football program. He knows that time is short on his career at BYU, and Tyler's been around the program for a long time. He's a multi-year captain, and he wanted to motivate his guys. Did he do it the wrong way? I don't think so. I think he did it like any other football program out there. But because BYU is a church-affiliated university and seems to take everything on the jaw when it comes to anything that seems to be out of the norm of what a holier-than-thou place should be like, so be it. But understand where Tyler was coming from. He was trying to make sure that his guys understood what his emotions were in that moment. He wanted to win that football game so badly. And trust me, Tyler has had some moments this year. I can't get over the 2 flops he had earlier this year. Those are very, very just absurd moments that are caught on film. But I can understand that this is a kid who wanted to go out there and put on for his team, and he wanted everybody to follow his lead. And I will say, in that second half, Tyler Batty looked as active and as good as he has looked all season long. He was leading from the front. He wasn't pushing from behind. He was out there doing the thing, and he and his teammates very nearly came back to win that football game. And you know what? It's a loss, and it sucks. I get all that. But I can understand why it was said. I can understand why certain fan bases out there, particularly one we've already talked about, the University of Utah fan base, they want to stick it to BYU as a quote-unquote gotcha moment. But guess what? Language is used, and it's used often. And I'm sure Connor Pay, I can ask him about it on the podcast when he joins us this week, and he'll own up to the fact that that language is said all over the place. And I'm talking just about BYU. Every program across college football, there is dirty language used. It's endemic to the sport, and you can like it. You don't have to like it. It doesn't matter. It's used. It's there. And let's all just understand what Tyler Batty was trying to do, the message he was trying to convey to his teammates, and understand that he was trying to be the best leader he possibly knew how to be in that moment. And who's to say that the outcome would have been any different had he been in there? All right, guys, darn it, let's get after it. Like, he went out there, and once again, he led from the front. This was not a guy who was saying stuff in the locker room and then was timid as a church mouse out on the field. He brought it in that second half. Most of his teammates brought it in the second half, and they came 2 yards short of pulling off an absolutely epic comeback win. I think I saw it on the broadcast since 2004 when trailing by 21 plus points. BYU was 0-36 since 2004. That would have been an incredible comeback, and they very, very nearly pulled it off. And I think that speech from Tyler Batty, it absolutely played a key role in motivating BYU to get back into that football game. All right. So final thing of what I want to talk about looking back, and it's kind of a look forward as well, is that now that Colorado, Arizona State, BYU, and Iowa State are now tied at 7-2 atop the Big 12, what needs to happen to get BYU to the Big 12 title game? And frankly, what are the odds that BYU can pull off what they need to pull off to make it to Arlington a week from Saturday? We'll dig into that as we round up this edition of Locked On Cougars next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you to get you out to whatever event you happen to be interested in, whether it's a sporting event, concert, theater, you have a favorite comedian coming to town. They got all the tickets to all the events, and the best part is they got a new feature on their app called Game Time Picks. Makes getting your tickets to see your favorite events even easier. Filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on those great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets to find the right deal for you. The best part about it is in the app, they've got incredible features, including all-in pricing, seat views, a lowest price guarantee, which will credit you 110% of the difference on the tickets if you find better seats for a better price from our friends at Game Time. And they also have what they call their game time ticket coverage, including lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and even job loss protection. Think about that. So download the Game Time app today and take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with our friends at the Game Time app and the Game Time Picks feature. All you got to do is create an account in the Game Time app, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and get $20 off your first purchase. Once again, create that account, some terms apply, and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today, and of course, what time is it? It's game time. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you guys have been hearing enough about the Locked On Cougars Insider Group, but I'm not going to stop talking about it because I think we've got a really, really good thing going on with the Insiders Group. If you'd like to be a part of it, click the link in the show notes today. Join us. You get a 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you. Just $5 a month after that to be a part of it. And the best part is it's coming to your phone. The insider information, comes to your phone in the form of a text message. Doesn't get much more intimate than that. We can have one-on-one conversations with myself in game during the week, whatever you got on your mind. I'm happy to interact with you guys. All you got to do is join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group and do it today. All right, before we go on today's show, BYU obviously has to beat Houston this week to keep their hopes of going to the Big 12 title game alive. Now, there's a four-way tie atop the conference, and the math is simple for BYU to make the Big 12 title game. A, they got to beat Houston. That's job number one. And then B, you got to have one of Arizona State or Iowa State lose to get BYU into that title game. If Arizona State, who kicks off on Saturday afternoon against Arizona, loses to the Wildcats, BYU, so long as they beat the Houston Cougars, will be going to Arlington. Conversely, if Iowa State happens to lose to Kansas State in Farmageddon, that begins at 5:30 on Saturday, BYU with a win over Houston also would make the Big 12 title game. So the math is pretty simple for BYU. Win your game and hope one of those two games has the result you need. And essentially, all you got to do is root for the Wildcats, root for Arizona or Kansas State, those two Wildcats. If they can notch a win or wins, BYU will be heading to Arlington to play in the Big 12 title game. So what are the odds of that happening? Well, I'm going to turn to a good friend of the podcast, a guy who's doing an incredible job for Sports Illustrated, and that's Casey Lundquist with Cougs Daily over on the Sports Illustrated network. He went through the FPI possibilities for BYU in terms of what it's going to take for them and what predictions are coming for BYU to make the Big 12 title game. So, as he mentioned, first and foremost, BYU needs to beat Houston. FPI gives BYU an 87.1% chance of beating the Cougars. So, heavy advantage to BYU to take care of what they can control, and that's winning their game against the Houston Cougars. But then he mentions this. BYU either needs Arizona State to lose to Arizona or Iowa State to lose to Kansas State. FPI says Arizona State has a 71.6% chance of beating Arizona, but the FPI for Iowa State says they have a 54.4% chance to beat Kansas State. So it seems more likely that Iowa State could lose and thereby get BYU to Arlington. But then he also mentions, what are the chances that both Iowa State and Arizona State win? It's a 39% chance. So As he mentions, the punchline essentially is that BYU's chances to make the Big 12 title game are essentially 50-50 or a coin flip. The combined odds of BYU winning and either Iowa State or Arizona State losing are 53% for that to play out. It's right there. It's on a knife's edge, and it can go either way. It's disappointing that BYU couldn't beat Arizona State after everything they went through in that game and getting what I believe should at least have been a closer shot to the end zone, because there should have been some sort of penalty. And Kalani Sitake said it after the game that essentially the conference weighed in and said, we're not calling anything in this circumstance. Was that to make sure that Arizona State fans were appeased? That part, I don't know. And I'm not going to delve into conspiracy theories on that, but I can tell you that there was a prevailing thought that BYU felt like they were going to be at least 15 yards closer due to a combination of factors. A, our good friend Kenny Dillingham losing his ever-loving mind on the officials. That probably should have drawn an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. The fans rushing the field during the middle of a play, that can also draw 15 yards. BYU is well aware of that fact. So they've seen that 3 times against Utah. And then also, what about intentional grounding? The intentional grounding one, to me, doesn't make much sense because there was a wide receiver in that general vicinity of where that throw went. I know it was thrown up and it was thrown into the stands, but if you watch the route combination there's a wide receiver angling towards that sideline where Sam Levitt threw it to. So that one seems the least likely. The overall takeaway is BYU could have won that game, and had they won that game, we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. We'd already be talking about them going to Arlington, and literally we'd be talking today, what are the chances they play Iowa State? What are the chances they play Colorado? That would have kind of been the conversation for today's podcast, but they did not get the job done. And now it's a 53% chance of getting the combination of results that BYU needs to make it to Arlington. And that's shaky. You're relying on other people to do things for you. And that's never a good feeling because you have to have results play a certain way. But priority number 1 for BYU is handle your business against the Houston Cougars. Houston is coming in. They know they're not going bowling. They're in the year 1 of a rebuild with a new coaching staff. But I can tell you the mindset of the Houston Cougars is going to be, hey, let's go play spoiler maker, make sure that BYU finishes the season with a 3-game losing streak after a 9-0 start. You want to have some upset BYU fans? Have them lose to the fellow Cougars, the Cougs, Coogs. That would be an absolute damper on BYU's hopes, especially considering, let's say, one of those 2 other games, whether it's Iowa State losing to Kansas State or Arizona notching an upset over Arizona State. If that were to happen and BYU were to lay an egg against Houston, man, that would be a really, really tough pill to swallow. So priority 1 for BYU is hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And what does that entail? Well, hope for the best means, A, you're going to take care of your business and beat Houston late Saturday night, and also hope that one of those 2 games has the combination of results that you need to ensure that you can make it to Arlington. What does preparing for the worst mean? Well, it means being ready to accept whatever might the fate be out there for you guys after Saturday night. You might beat Houston, and by the time you're midway through the first quarter, you might already know that the Big 12 title game is set and it's Iowa State and Arizona State, and you've been aced out, and you're potentially looking at what then is probably the Alamo Bowl or something to that effect. Be a big damper on what was a pretty promising season at one point, but that's where things stand for BYU, and we'll continue to break this down all week long, but that's 53%. Once again, Casey Lundquist, if you want to go over, search out Cougs Daily on the Sports Illustrated Network, you can read up more about it, but that's what it breaks down to, is a 53% chance of BYU getting the combination of results they need and also winning their game against Houston. But priority number 1 for BYU is focus on what you can control, and what you can control is beating Houston on Saturday night. All right, enough bloviating on from me today. It's been a lot of me standing on my soapbox, but where I stood after rewatching this game against Arizona State, there wasn't much I could take away that was going to make what I felt like make you feel any better about BYU's chances of winning that game. But they came close and they battled, but showing up for one half of football, it's not enough. They got to play a full 60 minutes, and hopefully they'll play that full 60 minutes and handle their business against Houston on Saturday evening. All right, that's going to do it. A big thank you, as always, for all of your support of the podcast. Cannot thank you guys enough for continuing to support this show. Maybe some of you might be checking out after this, but so be it. But until tomorrow, have a great rest of your day. We're expecting, by the way, this week to catch up with Locked On Cougs host Parker Ainsworth, talk about Houston and BYU, and also expecting to catch up with Connor Pay, get his thoughts on everything that played out at ASU, and also look ahead to senior day for him as well. So plenty of coverage to come this week, even with Thanksgiving. And as always, thank you to all of you once again who make Locked On Cougars a part of your day, being everydayers with us here. And as always, thank you for making it your first view and or listen right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.